Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy that you could join us today for WIOA and NRS, Back to the Basics. I'm June Rawl, the director for IPDAY, and I'm happy to be here with you today. I'm sure that many of you who are joining us today are part of adult education programs that are beneficiaries of grants funded by the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. With funding, we have to always remember that that comes with accountability. And that is why we're here to discuss the national reporting system and steps that are in place for adult education. Today's webinar is intended to give you a brief overview of both WIOA and the NRS. Our facilitators today are Yolanda Flores and Ariel Pachokas from Collier County Public Schools. They're going to provide you some strategies to help you to meet the performance indicators established by WIOA. But before we get started, I will remind you of just a few housekeeping reminders. All of you are muted, and we do encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A box. Later in the presentation, Yolanda and Ariel will direct you to put some things in the chat box as well. So note that questions will go in the Q&A, and then there will be a little chat going on in the chat box. This webinar, like all webinars, are recorded and it will be archived on the IPDAY website within 48 hours. The presentation is there as well. So enjoy the webinar. We'll be watching for your questions and comments in the Q&A, and I'm going to turn it over now to Ariel and Yolanda as we discuss back to the basics of WIOA and the NRS.
Thank you, June, for inviting Ariel and me to share a little bit about WIOA, which of course is very dear and near to our hearts as both of us work deeply with it. But not only that, I was a participant of CETA, which is one of the predecessors of WIOA many years ago in the late 70s, early 80s. So from a personal point of view, I can speak to the importance of this federal legislation and how it benefits so many individuals in helping them gain the skills that they need to find a career. So in education, we like to use a lot of acronyms, and today you're going to hear several as you learn about WIOA. Ultimately, our hope is to provide you with a basic level of understanding of the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, learn about the partners, the core partners that are funded by this federal legislation, and how the legislation impacts adult education providers at the local level. We will also, as you mentioned, provide a review of the national reporting system, strategies, which we are all interested in as local providers, learning from each other of how we can meet those education outcomes. And finally, talk a little bit about those common set of performance indicators that all the core partners are held accountable to. And again, for those of you that have been involved in education, deciphering any piece of legislation is not easy, but it's critical that we have a basic understanding of WIOA since it drives our work and helps us better understand the expectations that are laid out by the United States Department of Labor, as well as the Florida Department of Education. So, like anything else, it's important for us to understand where we came from, right? So WIOA is just the latest of federal acts in a whole series. We started back in 1962 with the MDTA. And basically what this piece of legislation did, it provided federal funding to retrain workers displaced because of the technological change that was going on in our society. From there, as you can see, it evolved into CETA, JTPA, WIA, and WIOA. And I'm not going to read all those descriptors to you. You can look at those. The important thing for you to walk away with is that as you go from legislation to legislation, there's an evolution. So what do you notice there? if you want to type in your chat box, what is it that you notice as we go from one piece of legislation to the other? Feel free to type it into your chat box. Can you see any connection to the work that we do in adult education? So as you're typing in there, Ariel, do you want to pitch in? What is it that you notice?
Sure. So some of the main pieces that I notice are really the coordination of effort, the increased accountability for all stakeholders, not just our adult education programs, but even from the perspective of the students, but also those core partners that we'll get into later. And then the key one there is that regional planning across local areas, how do we maximize those resources?
So if you're in the state of Florida this past year has started engaging in collaboration efforts. And we've been placed into regions where adult education providers are coming together and looking at, first of all, their outcomes. Second is what are areas that we could maximize. And then finally, how can we work together across the region in order to improve those outcomes? That's directly related to WIOA. It's not the Florida Department of Education that is mandating this. It's this federal legislation that is providing funding to us. Okay, is there anything in the chat box? Anyone that said anything differently?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
We'll keep going.
All right.
So as we get into the WIOA funded programs, we start to see the need for the intended coordination of services among all WIOA partners. We notice that adult education is not the only funded program through WIOA, and in many other states, all of these programs are really administered by the Department of Labor, including adult education. So Florida is really in a unique scenario where we need to kind of operate a little differently. However, as an adult education provider, we rely on these agencies to best support the varied needs of our student population. One example that comes right off to mind for me of how we rely on some of these partners are a few of our current students, when they first started, shared that they had a disability or struggle in some areas. However, our adult education program doesn't have the resources or the expertise to identify a disability, create a psychological evaluation, provide those services that often are needed. However, our partners at Voc Rehab have those resources to support the students and guide us. So we rely on them to do these evaluations, guide us and guide our instruction so that we can best support our students, but at the same time helping them navigate requests for accommodations with the GED or other testing services.
So what does that look like, Ariel, in terms, once you identify that a student has a need, what's that process looks like in referring them to Voc Rehab? So
then what we do is we pick up that phone, we fill out a form. There's a form that our local provider here has, and we guide the student, and they have to kind of go over there and self-advocate and kind of lead them, but we do a lot of the legwork with them, putting them in contact, making sure we have a point of contact, following up with the student that did this work, did you connect with them, did they come back for their first meeting, their second meeting, the next visits, their scheduled appointments. So we're hand-holding, but we also we know that we need to do that because these are those individuals that need that additional support. What we're also trying to do is give them the ownership and the ability to advocate and be able to navigate systems which are complex.
Right, and that is critical because so many of our students that we served within our adult education program may have a disability. And so getting that psychological from vocational rehabilitation, it is what we need in order for us to be able to develop a 504 plan for that adult. And then of course, that is beneficial for when they do sign up to take the GED test. They need that for them to get those accommodations.
Or also just as important when they transition to post-secondary or college, where they might want those services to continue then, especially as they go for their certification exams.
So that's a perfect example of how the adult education program partners with Voc Rehab. Can you give me an example of how you partner with one of the programs funded under Title I?
So under Title I, we work closely with CareerSource, and with them, they have a program really focused on here locally. They call it graduation, destination graduation, where they're looking at students who are either at high risk of dropping out or have dropped out, and then they transition them to our adult education program, where the focus is for us to help them gain their high school equivalency, their GED. We do it right there on site at their CareerSource Center, or they refer them to one of our other locations or online. And then they'll even pay these students $500 when they earn their GED. So it's really that collective whole working together in tandem with a plan to help that student graduate complete. But not only in there, the next step comes in with that Title III piece, the employment services. So already working with CareerSource, what is it that they want to do with their high school diploma, and what do we need to do to help them transition into either technical training, higher education, or employment?
How about also, can you elaborate a little bit more about employment services with your ESOL population?
That's a great one, because we bring in CareerSource. We do a lot of the pieces with working on resumes and interviewing skills, because that's just a natural place to insert the writing component, the communication aspects, the language aspect. But we bring in also speakers from CareerSource or even our employment offices to kind of help our professionals from other countries facilitate their transition into employment gaps that exist currently, that have tremendous experiences but might lack just the refinement in the language. And right now we're seeing a tremendous collaboration with both CareerSource and these employers to move individuals who are professionals as engineers, working as Uber drivers, or doctors in their countries stocking shelves, where we can put them in a better position.
Okay, so Ariel, those were all perfect examples of how adult education partners with those core partners. So each state is required to submit a unified plan that addresses how they will implement WIOA and outline success strategies for continuous improvement. In addition to that, the workforce regions are required to do one as well. And within that are some of the elements that Ariel mentioned of how the core partners are going to work together. Here in the state of Florida, these are the core partners listed up on your screen. The Florida Department of Career and Adult Education, Vocational Rehabilitation and Blind Services, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, and of course, CareerSource Florida. So that can be mirrored back down at the local level. So some of the things that Ariel mentioned, you should look back to your local level and see what does it look like for your region. Those same services in some manner are being offered to you and your students.
And many of us should be familiar with it, or if we're new, we should become familiar with it, because as you develop and write for your grants that are offered by the Department of Education, or you start new IET programs, these unified plans are really where we're referring to identify what are those programs that are most needed, what are those gaps that exist within our community, and what are those other partners doing that we can partner with or assist or transition students to.
Okay. So Ariel, now let's take a closer look at Title II, AFLA.
So as we look closer at AFLA, what is it? We're really looking at the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act and the programs that fall within it. So we have the Adult Basic Education, Adult Secondary Education, Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, and then obviously our English Language Acquisition programs.
Okay, so the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act supports and promotes adult education and literacy activities. Basic grants are given to states to provide educational opportunities for individuals who are functioning below the post-secondary level. So let's take a few minutes and in the chat box, answer this question. At the local level, what AFLA grants do you receive? Type your responses in the chat box.
And so while we're waiting on some of these, as you're reflecting, I'm seeing a couple of questions come in. And one of the questions I see come in is CareerSource available in other states besides Florida? CareerSource is available in other states besides Florida. CareerSource is a name just here in Florida. You know them more as your workforce development boards.
That's correct. But every state that receives this funding, it's that same kind of system with workforce development boards that are driving the work.
And so what I saw some messages in the chat box that I guess the chat box is disabled. So if you want to dump it in the Q&A, we can reference it from there. And so I see some coming in through the Q&A that we have the AGE, we have ILCE, and I think also corrections is part of that.
That's correct. Those are the 3 grants in the state of Florida. In other states, they might be named a little bit different, or it might look a little different, but these are the 3 main grants here in the state of Florida. You want to talk a little bit about that area?
Yeah, and so very quickly, what are those grants for those of us that are new to this? AGE is really focusing on the adult education literacy components, really that it's the overarching umbrella of how do we improve our workforce. We have ILCE really at providing access for our English language learners to maximize their ability to contribute within our community. And then corrections, and that's one that we have here in Collier County as well, and that's focused on reducing recidivism and helping our criminal offenders successfully re-enter society.
So at the end of the day, these 3 grants that we get in the state of Florida, it's really not just about teaching literacy skills. It's not just about recidivism, but really all of them are about helping provide the individuals with the skills that they need that hopefully will lead them to a career so they can be economically self-sufficient.
So as we mentioned earlier, the WIOA is really one of the key pieces that we noticed in WIOA is how it's evolved, and one of those main areas is accountability. And so as we look across each of the different components of WIOA, we notice that there's 6 main performance accountability indicators, and each focused on the key 6 core programs. What are those 6 core programs? We have adult, we have dislocated workers, youth, we have the Adult Education Family Literacy Act program, employment services, and vocational rehabilitation. Like Yolanda said before, all really targeting and focusing that advancement in a career, an advancement in a paycheck, advancement in self-sufficiency.
So one of the things that here in the state of Florida, we're working through as part of this collaboration, but also some of the committees taking place at the state level, is how do we increase that coordination in order to capture these outcomes in a more systemic, better, since again, we all serve those core. And I think the challenge is that we all have different accountability systems, databases that we use. So that's an area of growth for our state and one that we're looking to improve on. But again, there is no such thing as a free lunch. And that's why accountability is important.
And so we just got another question that came in, and since we're touching upon it, I think is a good time. One of the questions is asking, where can a student with a learning disability go and get accommodations? And so, or receive the services to get accommodations. And so you really want to look for that vocational rehabilitation office. That is a specific agency that serves the whole state of Florida. And so you should be able to Google that and find it for your local region.
And it might be called something differently in other states, but again, it is one of the core partners. So it exists. Do a Google search also with the one-stop centers and things that are mingled together. If you're not quite sure, reach out to your workforce development board, and I'm sure they will be able to point you in the right direction. Again, here in Florida, in our district, in order for us as an education provider to be able to provide accommodations, we need that 504 plan for an individual that has been out of school for a while. So many of them are not able to pay for their own psychological. So that's why vocational rehabilitation is important. Now, if someone has the funds to be able to pay for their own, they can go to a psychologist, get a psychological, present it at your school, and then each school has their own method of who's responsible for writing that 504 plan for that student. Here in Collier County, we have individuals, 2 individuals that work with our adults with disabilities through our workforce programs that write that 504 plan and then provide that information to the instructors so that the instructors know what strategies to use with those students.
Excellent.
Okay.
Great questions. So we're talking about the performance indicators. Can you guess? And we won't use, oh, I see the chat box is working now. Thank you so much. Can you guess what the 6 performance indicators might be? And in this case, you might want to think about the work that you do on a regular basis, and how are you held accountable in adult education, or how are we held accountable in adult education?
Okay, so put on your thinking caps, and we want to see those responses coming in.
We'll keep going. So here are the 6 performance indicators. And you're probably noticing some pieces that are familiar and noticing some things of how does it apply. We have employment 2nd quarter, employment 4th quarter, medium earnings, credential attainment, measurable skill gains. That should ring a bell in our world. And then effectiveness in serving employers.
Before you start on addressing those, Ariel, just the one on effectiveness in serving employers, that one is one that we have not heard much about. I think everyone is still trying to decipher what does that mean? How can you measure that? So that's one that really here in Florida, we're not there yet with. But Ariel, can you speak about the other?
Sure. And like I said before, as we look at this, a big piece is focused on either employment, effectiveness with employers, medium earnings. And I think as we learn more about WIOA and we understand it better, I think we start seeing the relationship that the main outcome for our students and the only outcome for our students is ultimately income. And I think that's something we just need to plant in the back of our minds for the moment, because why are our students coming? What are they looking for? We'll circle back to that. But as we talk about measurable skill gains, what is that? Well, that's the how our students might demonstrate their advancement as they post-test and transition to post-secondary. When we talk about the credential attainment, as they transition to post-secondary, what are those credentials that they're earning? Or as we're developing now IET programs, what are those credentials that they might work towards and start earning or working towards and attaining to better improve their opportunities for employment and ultimately increasing their earnings. And as we talk about effectiveness in serving employers, like Yolanda said, it's really about how we can also increase their pathway, their opportunities with not just with finding employment, but advancing.
Ariel, I think one of the things that providers at the local level have a challenge with understanding is that really employment after the 2nd quarter or 4th quarter or median earnings, and how is that information captured, right? And so here in the state of Florida, the state of Florida uses a system called FEPPIP, and FEPPIP, what they do is they match the Social Security numbers of students that were enrolled in a workforce program and after the 2nd quarter, 4th quarter to see if they are employed in the state of Florida. Also, they're able to get their median earnings through that means. One of the challenges that we face here is that FEPPIP is a state-driven program. So for the counties that are in the northern part of Florida that border Georgia and Alabama And sometimes some of their students, when they graduate, go to work, but they go to work in Georgia or Alabama, that data is not captured, right?
Correct.
So it's always looking at having an understanding, how is the data being captured? And then what can we do different or better to improve those outcomes?
So we'll pause a little bit on those outcomes for a second and kind of transition to the national reporting system, where we're now focusing on how this data is being shared, being collected, but also how it pertains in adult education and the role that we play as we look at this. And so this is one of the, and it's kind of hard to see, but this is one of our NRS reports and how it demonstrates who our students are and where they are in the progress of either employment rate, median earnings, credential attainment, and measurable skill gains.
And all that information then is captured on the annual performance report, which states are required to submit. And if you're interested in the guide or handbook that is uploaded in IPDA, you have some links there that will take you to where you can find this information for your state. And you can compare how your state is doing to other states, right? So take a few minutes now, and what role do you play as it pertains to helping the state achieve the 6 indicators of performance? If you can go ahead and type it in the chat box.
And I know we're asking you to do a lot of typing today, but we were trying to embed a little bit of that reflection and activity piece. And so as those comments come in, I think this one ties right into the next piece. As you're reflecting on the role that you play, that you might be able to help support and assist, which do you think you have the least control of?
Are you seeing some responses, Ariel?
No, it's gotten quiet. It's gotten quiet.
They're thinking.
So one of the things that first came to me, I think the one that we struggle, and Yolanda touched upon it a little bit already, is that Social Security number. This is one that is difficult because we often feel that many of our students don't have it, or in my personal case, I don't usually like giving it away. One of the things we found is that that about currently, without really trying too hard, 42% of our students in Collier are providing a Social Security number, and that's without a lot of effort. One of the things we've noticed that transitioning from a paper form to an online registration form has really facilitated that collection, because students are more comfortable and willing to share it via a software program where it doesn't end up being written anywhere in particular. One of the other pieces we found is at giving students multiple opportunities and manners to collect it allows them, when maybe right now they don't have a Social Security number because they're in a proceeding of some sort, but soon after they are, and they're able to update that information.
Ariel, you're right on target in terms of how uncomfortable people feel sometimes with sharing the Social Security numbers, or sometimes, again, some of our students may not have it, right? But we have to focus on the positive, and we have to focus on the need for us to be able to get as many of the Social Security numbers as possible, because it will help us improve our program outcomes, right? So one of the critical things is you need to work with your staff, and you really need to provide that professional development to them and help them understand why is it that we're asking the students for their Social Security number. And then you need to provide professional development on how to ask the question, because it is a very sensitive nature, and ask it in a way so that our students do not feel uncomfortable, and also in a way that they don't have to disclose whether they have a Social Security number or not, right?
And one,
Also, our students need to understand the importance of why we're asking for that number, right? It's not that we're going to report it to immigration. It's not that we're going to share it with anyone, but they have to understand how we as a local provider derive this funding. And again, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Our legislators are holding us accountable for these outcomes. And so therefore, we have to do our best as providers to arrive at those outcomes.
and one of the pieces that we've kind of helped frame for our students in a much more sensitive way is, as we're doing more with IET programs, we want to be able, and the state's wanting to be able to see how completing an IET or continuing on from an IET to a post-secondary training program is supporting our students' advancement. And so that's the only way that we're able to kind of continue to kind of follow our students.
Anything in the chat box or questions, Ariel, before we move on to the next one?
No, there's we had some comments about using different methods and different methods of collecting instead of the whole Social Security number, perhaps just the last 4 digits. So those are great. And then, so that reminds me of when we went and visited in California. California this was one of the main issues they've been struggling and working in targeting as an area of refinement and improvement. And one of the things we found is many of the programs or school districts within California, they're not allowed to ask for a Social Security number, local policy. So, but they're still required under WIOA to gain some of the employment outcomes. So they were exploring different ways. So one of the ways they were looking at addressing that issue is having schools, having programs do a follow-up at Q2 and Q4 in following up with their students and collecting that information of who was not employed and now is employed, and how has their earnings changed. And then they upload that as supplemental data following as a supplemental data component.
And now many of you might say, well, our students changed their phone numbers, their emails, we can't keep up. But that's why it's important for you to build those relationships with those students when they're in your programs, right? And then also use social media when it's time, put it out there. And then for those students that you are able to connect with, find out, hey, have you heard from any of those other students that were in your classes with you? We've been trying to reach so-and-so and have not been able. Can you get them to please give us a call? Because we really need some information from there. So there's different strategies that you can use to help you meet those outcomes. Are we going to get to 100%? No, but we have to have a target to hit at and continue to improve on that.
Absolutely. And so then as we move on to other strategies for improving outcomes for employment, well, part of our adult education program is really focusing on that transition. And so providing those career services. So a lot of what we do in the new frameworks that have been developed that focus on the employability skills, really focusing on that, the interviewing skills, the application process, the resume building, and being able to speak to what you've placed on that resume are key components. We bring in speakers to our programs just to give students an opportunity, and we do even mock interviews. IET has been a huge component of this in giving and allowing our students to really put a real world application, a real world language component or math in a focused environment that gives them creates the relevancy for our students. Our students are not interested in learning another language for the enjoyment of learning a language, and our students are not coming to our program as lifelong learners, but really out of necessity. So as we start thinking of thinking about our students, their needs and their main interests, we can start building programs and developing it around what's most important for them. And as we do that, what we'll see that retention that leads to that post-test, that leads to that MSG, because there's got to be an advancement for our students.
Well, you have there as one of the last bullets there, you'll partner with CareerSource and businesses, right? Invite those businesses to your location. You can do things like round robin interviews for when they're looking for individuals in their industry. You can take the students to job fairs that are posted out in the community. The more practice that your students have with completing applications, with resume, with interviewing, the better they will become at it, right?
Absolutely. And I think a key piece in here as well is navigating technology, because I don't know of any application or process that I can start a job right now that doesn't require me having to do that on some kind of website or online application.
Right. And so hopefully, remember back to that employment outcome about medium earnings. You don't just want them to get any job, want them to get a well-paying job. So the more that you can do to prepare them, the better our outcomes.
And as we talk with partnering with our businesses, that's been an area that right now has been really hot for us in Collier County. There's a tremendous shortage of viable employees, and companies, businesses are reaching out to us to help, one, transition our students to them, and two, go into their business and provide language classes and academic classes to help upskill their current employees.
Before we move on, Ariel, do you want to just check and make sure that we have, if we have any questions or any other comments that we could share out?
No, I think there was one that came in of why would someone be more willing to put their social security number on online than a piece of paper. I think and again, this is just a perspective of mine, I think it's just the comfort of knowing there's a little bit less of eyes around me and around it. It's that comfort of technology. I think sometimes this screen gives me a comfort that I don't know who might be out there, but it might not go to anybody. And so I think there's just that comfort. I don't know what it is, but we've seen an increase of it just because we incorporated online. Go down to MSGs. So as we move on to MSGs and credentials attainment, a big thing for us is our academic MSGs. That's an area that we can control. That's the area that we have the most control in. And where does it start for us here in Collier County? It starts at orientation. This year alone, very different than we've done in the past. We've always had an online, or we've always had an orientation process. We've developed an online orientation just to be a little bit more global for our students, to let them know that we are one entity within Collier County. But more importantly, this year, we even asked all of our students, not just new students, but even returning students, to go through an orientation process. Why? Because we've made so many changes in the last year alone, let alone 2 years, that as they're continuing with us, we knew that we had many students that didn't know of all the new IET programs we've started to provide, how we're organizing our programs. More importantly, sharing of the importance of post-testing and how we have managed our programs to post-test at strategic intervals so that we don't miss those opportunities to demonstrate an academic MSG. And more importantly than that, create the student buy-in, because we rely on them to do well on that exam. Other pieces that we've incorporated to make sure that we're as successful as possible in demonstrating those MSGs, we operate on a managed enrollment that allows our teachers a chance to really build a relationship with those students. It allows those students to build that relationship with the teachers. We have a very structured pre-testing process for sure, but just as structured for post-testing, and ensuring that we haven't forgotten any of the little pieces, such as did we bring headphones in for that listening component? Did we bring pencil and paper for that math component? And obviously providing quality instruction that starts with ensuring that our teachers are properly trained. They know the big picture. Are we coaching them as much as our students in understanding what it is we're trying to do and how we're trying to do that and ensuring student success? And then at the last piece, a flexible instructional model, that we have different models to allow our students who live very complex lives of family, work, and etc., to be able to continue their learning when other factors might interfere or impact.
Ariel, I think one of the biggest challenges that programs have, and I hear so often, and I know because we've lived it, that the majority of our instructors are part-time, right? So when you have the majority of your instructors being part-time, how do you work with them, or what do you have in place in order to be able to prepare them to offer that quality instruction?
Well, we start off with a onboarding process. Every instructor goes through the same process, and we've broken it down into like a 3-day process that's chunked out. Everything from understanding a little bit of our curriculum frameworks and giving them the big picture, to the different instructional models, to then visiting classrooms and seeing what a beginning ELL learner is, what an intermediate might look like, what an advanced might look like, welcoming them into an ABE classroom, GED classroom, and understanding that one-room schoolhouse idea and how we try to differentiate instruction, all the way then to what do we already have created so that it's structured and organized, so the instructor, all they need to do is preview where they're going and not necessarily spend time building instruction.
And how about flexible instruction? I understand that you just recently started incorporating HiFlex.
Correct. So we've always had multiple sites, day and evening classes. We've always have had online, and we've since refined our online programs. But most recently, we've started exploring and playing with a HiFlex model, meaning that the class is delivered in person, but there's the ability for the student who isn't able to come in on a particular day, or because of an illness or something, is able to connect virtually and zoom into the class, engage with the students, engage with the teachers, see the content, participate all remotely. Now, it's not the same, but it has created that flexible instruction model that really guarantees student retention.
So it is about quality and not quantity, right? And this doesn't happen overnight. Since we started implementing or putting into place these things over the last several years, we have seen a shift in better outcomes and our students staying with us longer. So we're retaining them. The other thing that we have seen is that transition now into post-secondary as a result of the IETs.
And I think a big piece of that transition is when we're looking at it, is that increase going from 2 or 3 students transitioning to post-secondary training to, after a year of implementation, 20 students transition into post-secondary to 60 students. So we get into credentials and post-secondary MSGs, and this is what we were just talking about, that transition. And one of those key pieces is the IET programs, which plant seeds for students and give them an understanding of what are the possibilities. One of the main challenges that our learners come in with, especially from other countries where a nurse is a nurse is a nurse, we now come to the US where we have multiple roles of nursing, from a nursing assistant to a home health aide to a practical nurse to, and so how do we help them understand those roles, the requirements to accessing those programs, the income outcomes at the end, and maybe even the requirements to continue to advance in that career pathway term. Part of our MSG is that transition from adult education to post-secondary. And then, like we said earlier, is also the attainment or working towards that industry credential.
Mm-hmm. And finally, provide adult education navigators, counselors, advisors. They're called differently in different parts of Florida and different parts of the country. It's to help them transition to post-secondary, right? Think about it this way. In K-12, we have counselors. In 2- and 4-year schools, universities, we have advisors. In adult education, traditionally, we have not seen those counselors or those navigators. But more and more emphasis is being placed on this. And they are very, very critical to help with those transitions. Here in Collier County, we have 2 advisors in the Naples area. But then also we work with the Collaboratory, which is Southwest Florida's community education, that also has an interest in adult education. And they hired navigators to be able to promote adult education and post-secondary programs to all of Southwest Florida. So we provide our information to them, and as they go out into the community, whether it's at job fairs or presentations, etc., and they meet someone in need of services, whether it's adult ed or career training or a 2-year or 4-year degree, they refer them to that provider and help that student make that connection.
And so, and along those lines, so there's an entity that is not a WIOA core component, but definitely a partner in our work, and also a partner in our regional collaboration. Yep.
So again, as we come to the end of this, income is the only outcome for WIOA. And so it's important to start, if your program doesn't have some of those strategies or those elements in place, it's important for you to start moving in that direction to help improve your outcomes. Ariel?
And as you continue to explore, as you continue to dive deeper, whether it's with WIOA or whether it's with your grant writing or whether it's with your measurable skill gains in NRS, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. We're always here. Don't always have the answers, but a great place to start a conversation.
And back to you, June. Is June there?
So as
Thank
we're
you so much. Thank you so much, Ariel and Yolanda. That was really informative. I even learned more things today. So thank you so much. If you could just take a few seconds to provide some feedback for us, we really would appreciate hearing from you. There are just 3 short questions on the screen right now. If you would take a few seconds to answer them, we would really appreciate it.